Hi, I'm Dr. Kate Tumulty-Felice. So we've talked about ACEs, we've talked about how that shows up in your life. And I also want to talk to you about how we cope, what this behavior looks like in real life, and how we build resilience once we have a better understanding of where it comes from, why it happens, and what we can do with that information. One of the things I want to talk about is homeostasis, the balance that we have in our life. So if you look at this image, we have that window of tolerance, the area of where we're in optimal state, where we feel balance. When we are reactive and responsive, you can see that we can move into hyperarousal, where we become overreactive, emotionally distressed. We get to the emotional part of the brain. We're unable to tap into the prefrontal cortex for logic and reason and decision making. We feel that anxiety. Or we can be where we're shutting down in hypoarousal, right? Where we become depressed, lethargic, we just don't have motivation. It can become really difficult to get out of our own way. We can do this all the time, right? Our body doesn't necessarily stay in a state of homeostasis. But this doesn't have to be negative information when we can recognize when this is happening and build tools to help us effectively pull ourselves back into a state of balance. Sometimes we use mindfulness, breathing, other tools of being aware of what's happening and where we're going. And we'll talk more about those. But let's first talk about how we cope both effectively and less effectively. What can trauma look like in our life? What can challenges, what can adversity look like? How can that show up when we develop, and I use the word trauma to explain patterns of sometimes maladaptive behavior as a result of an experience that we've had, something that has affected us in such a way that we've come up with a coping mechanism that sometimes can be helpful, sometimes can be less so. These are some of the ways that we can, that what that looks like in our life. When we have a resistance to saying no, or we're afraid to fail, we feel over accommodating, our thoughts become scattered, we procrastinate. All of these things can be as a response to challenges that we've had in our life. Cumulative challenges, challenges that we've experienced, patterns of behavior that we've adapted to deal with times that are hard, trauma, adversity, things that we've been through, patterns of attachment, certain relationships in our life. All of these things can have absolutely cumulative effects on what we do, both positive and negative. Let's look at what some of the functional coping behavior might look like in real life. So when we talk about trauma or the things we've been through or the adversities we've faced or challenges that we've had, it could show up in a variety of ways. Some of those ways are highly functional. They get us through our day. They are what motivates us and drives us. They can be really adaptive. We can go through difficult times and adversity and come up with strategies and tools to overcome that. Some of them, again, when we talk about that balance, that homeostasis, when we are using that information in our best way, then that can be really adaptive. But it can also be on the continuum of maladaptive. Let's look at some of these for examples. The need for control. That can be in the outcomes, in our own appearance, in routines, in the right way to do things. That can be great, right? We can have a need for control, and that can make us be a really dedicated, detail-oriented employee or parent or person in other people's lives, that we control outcomes, that we make sure things are done. It can make us really reliable. That's the good side of the continuum. Where it becomes maladaptive is when we become over-focused on things that we can't control. And that, from a personal level, can put us in a place where we're constantly worrying about things we can't control or that are outside our locus of control. The next one, hypervigilance, that can be as a response to expecting something negative to happen, right? That when we are locked in that sympathetic nervous system, that perception of threat, we can become hypervigilant of threat. That can be really helpful or adaptive if you're in a position or a profession where you are geared toward focusing on threat perception. That can be good if you're in a classroom, in a job where you can be pretty aware of something that's going to go south or not be a good experience. But the negative side of that continuum can be, or the maladaptive coping can be when we're over vigilant, when we're unable to be present in the moment because we're always looking for the threat that comes next. Trust issues. Again, if we look at the healthy continuum of that, we should be able to be trusting in the world, trusting of others, able to communicate, able to see ourselves as part of the bigger picture. When it becomes maladaptive is when it becomes an issue in trust, when we're cynical or untrusting of other people based on long ago established patterns responsive to a negative experience or trauma that we've lived through. Anger. Anger can be a useful experience if it allows us to express something that is pent up. It can be cathartic. It can be helpful, that we learn from that made me angry, and we can express that and have open communication. We all know that when anger becomes maladaptive, when it's either toward ourselves or toward others, when it becomes too much, too far in an area that becomes unhealthy, maladaptive behavior. Being over accommodating. Feeling that need based on previous experience to keep the peace, to avoid conflict at all costs. Conflict can be a healthy thing, but there are some people who their response is to avoid it because it doesn't feel healthy, because previous experience has conditioned them to expect it to be an unhealthy experience. So they shy away from it, maybe avoiding the opportunity to express themselves and have a voice in a situation. So we can see how a lot of these can be very much adaptive, but can also slide to maladaptive depending upon what we recognize and what we continue to practice, whether that's a healthy response or a less healthy response for ourselves. Thrill or feel seeking. People who have been through adversity sometimes become apathetic and therefore seek to feel or seek to have some kind of emotion other than the one that they felt that they didn't like or feel comfortable with. And that can be adaptive when we find something that is healthy for us. Maybe we run or we exercise, and that makes us feel better. It helps us have a different perspective on the hard adversity or the trauma or the difficulty that we've been through that we're holding. But when it becomes too far, when it goes too far in that continuum, it can become maladaptive, something that is less healthy, that doesn't help us with the problem, but only exacerbates it. Constant busyness. And this is the case for a lot of professionals and parents and people in general, that we are a busy society and culture, which can be great because it helps us fit into the culture and the world we're in. Where it becomes maladaptive is when we have to be busy and we're unable to be present in the moment. So a lot of this has to do with responding to historic situations in our life and patterns of behavior, and how we can know about those and build resilience. So if we look at what we know about resilience, about positive psychology, about the research there, resilience is that ability to bounce back after adversity and to grow from it. So with that awareness of what we've been through, we can actually make our brain grow differently. We can change our habits of behavior. Hey, keep the ones that are adaptive, that are working for us, but then the ones that are not adaptive, that are maladaptive, that aren't working for us, that cause conflict or problem or a discomfort in ourselves, something that we just don't want to keep doing. We can literally reshape our brain and become more resilient. We can use that information as just that, as information to build a foundation, to build from our own foundation towards something that's more healthy and more resilient and adaptive in the future.